The fatal mistake. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was nothing short of magnificent. Its walls shimmered with radiant colors, their surfaces constantly shifting and changing, as though the very structure itself were alive. The Grand Hall echoed with the voices of countless beings from across the galaxy, each one representing a different species, their unique forms adding to the vibrancy of the chamber. Yet today, the usual calm and order had been replaced with chaos, the kind of chaos that could only come from an event so dire, so incomprehensible, that it shook the very foundations of the galaxy itself. High Counselor Xena Starweaver, a being of crystallized form with glowing hues that shifted in every color imaginable, attempted to bring the room to order. Her voice echoed through the hall, booming in a way that sent tremors through the chamber. "Order. Order in the chamber," she commanded, her voice reverberating across the space. Despite her best efforts, the noise continued to swell as representatives from various factions argued, shouted, and gestured frantically. I sat back in my hover seat, observing the diplomatic disaster unfold before me. As Ambassador Klex Brightheart of the Luminary Confederation, it was my job to maintain the delicate balance of interstellar relations. But today, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction, a grim amusement at watching the galaxy's most powerful leaders descend into a state of frantic disorder. Why? Because they had made the gravest of mistakes. You see, they had done something that no one in their right mind would do, something that had been warned against time and time again. They had killed a human. Not just any human, mind you, but Captain Amanda Stone, a renowned Earth scientist, and a symbol of humanity's peaceful and cooperative nature in the galaxy. Captain Amanda Stone, I mused quietly to myself. The same Amanda Stone who had recently developed the cure for the Relian plague. The same Amanda Stone who had a family waiting for her back on Mars colony. The same Amanda Stone who, by all accounts, was one of the nicest, most kind-hearted representatives of her species you could hope to meet. I leaned back, unable to stop the amused chuckle that escaped my lips. How foolish could they be? How could they not have realized the consequences of such an action? The situation had started with a group of pirates, the Crimson Nebula Pirates, who had attacked and captured a civilian Earth vessel. When the pirates had killed Captain Stone, they claimed it was an accident. We didn't know she was human. One of their representatives, blipped from the Silicon consciousness, sputtered, his holographic form flickering anxiously on the Council's central projection. The absurdity of their claim was nearly comical. How could they have not known? Humans had been a well-known and respected species for centuries. Even pirates like them should have been aware of the numerous warnings placed along every major trade route, which made it abundantly clear: don't engage in hostile actions against human vessels. The Council's most prominent leaders, however, seemed more concerned with finding a diplomatic solution rather than addressing the root of the issue. They seemed utterly clueless about the implications of this singular event. Ambassador Trilfstardenser of the Celestial Accord, a being whose bioluminescent tentacles wriggled in agitation, finally spoke, her voice sharp and filled with frustration. How much simpler could we make it? She demanded, her tentacles glowing brighter with each word. The warning beacons were placed for a reason. They should have been followed. I sighed, watching the escalating chaos with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. I had been warning everyone about this. It had been my idea to place the warning beacons in the first place. Yet now, as the representatives from the galaxy's most powerful civilizations squabbled like children, no one seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The galaxy had made the mistake of underestimating humanity for far too long. They saw humans as an unpredictable, primitive species, one that was more trouble than it was worth. Yet, in their arrogance, they failed to recognize the most dangerous thing about humanity: the sheer force of will and ingenuity they possessed. The humans might be small in numbers compared to the galaxy's ancient civilizations, but they had proven time and time again that they could rise to challenges in ways no one else could. I couldn't resist speaking up. Perhaps, I began, my voice cutting through the frantic noise of the chamber. We should discuss what the humans' reaction might be. After all, you've all been doing business with them for years now, accepting their medical advances, marveling at their so-called primitive but charming technology. But did any of you stop to study their military history? The room fell silent at my words. All eyes turned toward me, some filled with disbelief, others with curiosity. I could almost see the gears turning in their minds as they considered what I had said. Let me remind you, I continued, that humans perfected the art of warfare before they even left their own planet. Their species has a saying, mess with the bull, get the horns. I believe the situation we find ourselves in is exactly that. A species that has perfected the art of fighting is not going to sit idly by when one of their own is killed. The silence in the chamber was now thick with dawning realization. Even the perpetually floating spores of the fungal consciousness had stopped their gentle drift and were now fixed on the central display. The last representative to speak was Elder Quantum, a member of the Machine Collective, who spoke with a calm, measured tone. We should discuss the appropriate response to the human reaction, he suggested, his metallic voice devoid of emotion, yet somehow even more unsettling in its cold calculation. It was then that High Counselor Xena Starweaver shifted in her crystalline seat, her form shimmering in a deep purple hue that signaled her growing concern. According to our latest reports, she said, her voice unnaturally calm, every human colony in the galaxy has gone silent. All trade routes they maintained have been suspended. Every diplomatic channel has been closed, except for one. The central hologram flickered to life, displaying a simple text message in humanity's primitive binary language. The words were clear and concise. Diplomatic relations temporarily suspended pending proportional response to acts of piracy against Earth citizens. Normal operations will resume once justice has been served. The words sent a chill through the chamber. Proportional response, a representative from the Avon Leagues muttered. What does that mean? I couldn't help but laugh again. This time, the entire council turned to me, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. You really don't know much about human history, do you? I asked, wiping away the tears of laughter that had formed in my primary visual organs. Trust me, you're about to find out. The human response. The atmosphere in the Galactic Council chamber had shifted from a chaotic, almost farcical exchange to one of grim realization. The room, once alive with the sound of heated arguments and frantic gesturing, had quieted. The only sound now was the hum of the chamber's energy systems, which seemed almost too loud in the oppressive silence that had fallen over the council. Every representative, from the ancient beings of the Machine Collective to the alien species of the Celestial Accord, was fixated on the message that humanity had sent. I leaned back in my hover chair, watching the reactions unfold. It was a moment I had seen coming from miles away, yet even I couldn't have predicted the swift and furious response that was about to follow. The humans, with their unpredictable nature, had just made it clear that they were no longer the meek, misunderstood species that some had believed them to be. The message they had sent was a warning, but it was also a declaration. We are not to be trifled with. The question now was, how would the galaxy respond to the shockwave that humanity was about to send? High Counselor Xena Starweaver was the first to break the silence, her crystalline form pulsing with a glow that was darker than ever before. Her voice, when it finally came, was surprisingly calm. We must consider our options carefully. We cannot ignore the implications of the human response. We need a strategy that will prevent escalation. Her words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the chamber would return to the tense discussions of before. But then, the truth of her statement began to sink in. Every council member, even those who had previously dismissed the humans as a naive, unruly species, now understood that their power could no longer be underestimated. Humanity had always been viewed as a force that, while unpredictable, was still somewhat manageable. That illusion was shattering. We must not be rash. Ambassador Trill Stardenser of the Celestial Accord spoke next, her bioluminescent tentacles glowing brighter as she spoke, betraying her increasing agitation. We cannot risk provoking a war with humanity. They are not a race to be reckoned with lightly." I watched as her words took hold of the room. Many of the representatives, who had previously been skeptical of human strength, now seemed to reconsider their stance. I could almost see the wheels turning in their minds as they calculated the consequences of misjudging the humans. "High Counselor," a voice from the back of the room called out. It was one of the older members of the Avon Leagues, his voice raspy with age, but still powerful. "How do we proceed? The humans have cut all communication channels, and their message speaks of proportional response. What does that even mean?" I could hear the fear in his voice, a fear that was echoed by others in the room. The thought of angering a species that had been underestimated for so long was terrifying. But I, Ambassador Klex Brightheart, was not as frightened. In fact, I had to suppress a smirk. This was exactly what I had warned them about. Now, the galaxy would learn the hard way that humans were not to be underestimated. As I have said before, I interjected, leaning forward, "You all need to study human history. You don't understand what you're dealing with." I paused for a moment, letting my words sink in. "You think that they will simply allow this transgression to go unpunished. You are wrong. The humans perfected warfare long before they had the technological means to leave their own planet. They fought wars for centuries, before they even reached the stars. When they say proportional response, they mean exactly that. And if you're not careful, that response will be swift, brutal, and far-reaching." I could feel the eyes of the council on me, some of them narrowing in suspicion, others wide in realization. It was as though they were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation, but there was still a sense of disbelief. How could a species that had never been considered a true galactic power hold such sway? How could they command such terrifying military prowess? Just as I was about to continue, a sudden disruption interrupted the tense atmosphere. The central hologram, which had been projecting a static image of the message from humanity, flickered and shifted. A new transmission came through, a live feed, but this one was different. It wasn't from the humans directly. Instead, it was a neutral third party, one that had close ties with Earth's military. A new voice filled the chamber, one that carried the unmistakable authority of the Terran Federation. "This is Commander Elena Marlowe, commanding officer of the Terran Fleet's Central Command." The voice began, confident and unwavering. "In response to the killing of Captain Amanda Stone, and in accordance with Earth's established protocols for protecting its citizens, we have dispatched a fleet of ships to the location of the incident. As per our laws, the perpetrators of this crime will be sought, and Earth will not rest until justice is served." The image flickered again, revealing a map of the solar system, showing the movement of numerous human warships toward the coordinates where the attack had taken place. The sheer size and power of the fleet were evident, and the room fell silent once again. The council members exchanged nervous glances, clearly trying to process what this meant for their delicate intergalactic balance. "This is the beginning," Commander Marlowe continued, her voice echoing through the chamber. "And we will not stop until the guilty parties are held accountable. Humanity does not forget. We do not forgive. And we will not back down from protecting our own." As the transmission ended, the room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Some representatives began to speak urgently. Others were trying to contact their homeworlds, no doubt trying to get a handle on the unfolding situation. But the underlying truth was clear. Humanity had drawn a line in the sand, and the galaxy was now at its mercy. I couldn't help but watch, a slow smile spreading across my face. The humans had spoken, and the galaxy would have no choice but to listen. They had been provoked, and now they were showing the universe just how deadly their response could be. "Perhaps," I said, standing to address the room one last time, "you'll all reconsider the lessons of history now. The human response may be just the beginning, and I hope you're all ready for what comes next." The unseen fury. The echoes of the human transmission still lingered in the air, vibrating through the walls of the Galactic Council chamber like the distant thunder of an approaching storm. The silence that followed was palpable, thick with tension and uncertainty. It was as if the very foundations of the galaxy's order had been shaken, and no one knew how the pieces would fall. The hum of the chamber's energy systems, once a comforting background noise, now felt like an oppressive weight, pressing down on every representative present. High Counselor Xena Starweaver, her crystalline form flickering in shades of dark purple, finally broke the silence. "We must act quickly," she said, her voice filled with a kind of restrained urgency that had not been there before. "We cannot afford to underestimate humanity's response. If their fleet is already en route, we must prepare for the worst." But it was not just the fleets of humanity that loomed over the Council. It was the growing realization that the events set in motion by the death of Captain Amanda Stone had ignited a firestorm that could engulf the entire galaxy. The message was clear. Earth was no longer a passive player in galactic politics. They were ready to fight, and they were prepared to take whatever measures necessary to protect their citizens. "Admiral," Xena turned toward a member of the Keshur species, whose heavily armored exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's artificial lighting. "You've worked closely with the human delegations. What is the best course of action here? What do we offer them to de-escalate the situation?" The Keshur admiral, known for his pragmatic approach, hesitated before responding. "I have studied the humans' past actions, High Counselor, and I will say this. They are not like us. They will not be swayed by words or promises of diplomacy. When they decide to act, they act swiftly and decisively. We must prepare for a response far more severe than anything we have ever seen." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The room shifted uneasily, and even those species who had long regarded themselves as the most powerful in the galaxy began to murmur amongst themselves. The realization was sinking in. Humanity was no longer something to be ignored. The attack on Captain Stone had awakened something primal within them, a fury that would not be easily extinguished. I could see it in the faces of the council members. Some were still unwilling to accept what they were hearing. Others, however, seemed to have had their doubts shattered. The humans' reputation for unpredictability had always been a point of concern, but now it was clear that their ability to exact vengeance was no longer a mere possibility. It was an undeniable fact. "Perhaps it's time we acknowledge that this situation is no longer under our control," I said, my voice cutting through the growing uncertainty. "The humans have already made their decision. They will not negotiate. They will not beg for mercy. They have chosen to act, and they will do so with the same ruthlessness that has defined their history." A ripple of anxiety passed through the room, but Xena held up her hand, silencing the council once more. "I agree with Ambassador Brightheart," she said, her voice firm. "We must prepare for the worst, and that includes the possibility that humanity will come to take justice into their own hands, with or without our approval." The room quieted again, and for a moment there was an air of collective introspection. All of us, for the first time, were forced to consider the enormity of what had transpired. The humans were not just angry, they were on a warpath, and no one knew exactly where that path would lead. The fleet approaches. As the days passed, the presence of the human fleet grew ever more real. The once distant blip on the sensors had now become a full-scale, undeniable force. The ships, massive and unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, began to pour out of Earth's space, a fleet that dwarfed any of the major military forces in the galaxy. I had seen human ships before, but never like this. These weren't the civilian vessels or the relatively humble military ships that had once patrolled the borders of human space. No, these were warships, sleek, imposing, and bristling with weaponry that looked like it had been designed for nothing less than total destruction. The reports from the Kalian reconnaissance teams were chilling. "The human fleet is moving with precision," the lead commander reported, his voice tight with apprehension. "They've deployed fleets in multiple formations, surrounding the system. It's clear that they intend to prevent any escape. They are preparing for something far more than a show of force. Have they made any contact with the pirates? Xena asked, her voice a mixture of desperation and apprehension. No, High Counselor, the Kalian commander replied, his tone grim. There has been no communication. The human ships are advancing without warning. I could see the fear in the eyes of the council members. They had underestimated the humans once, and now it seemed that their inability to grasp the magnitude of their mistake was about to cost them dearly. The pirates are still within the sector, correct? Xena asked, her voice filled with a kind of grim determination. Yes, the Kalian commander confirmed, but they are scattered. It seems that humanity has isolated their movements. The pirates have no way to escape, no way to hide. The council fell into stunned silence once more. The realization that the humans were not simply responding to an attack, but were systematically hunting down the pirates who had killed Captain Stone, was sobering. They were not just seeking vengeance for the death of a diplomat. They were cleansing the galaxy of those who dared to challenge them. The Galactic Awakening. As the human fleet drew closer, an undeniable shift began to take place across the galaxy. The once unchallenged dominion of the old, powerful species began to crumble, piece by piece. Reports flooded in from various systems, all describing similar phenomena. Trade routes that had been closed, diplomatic channels that had gone silent, and entire sectors of space that seemed to be falling into disarray. Even the most distant worlds, where the human presence was almost non-existent, felt the tremors of this new power. It wasn't just the fear of humanity's wrath that was spreading. It was the realization that humans had the ability to enforce their will on the galaxy. Their message had been received loud and clear. They would no longer be passive participants in the intergalactic community. They had drawn a line in the sand, and they were willing to fight to defend what was theirs. For the first time in millennia, the established power structures of the galaxy were being challenged by a species that had once been dismissed as inconsequential. Humanity's fierce independence and relentless determination were now at the forefront, and there was no telling how far they would go to assert their dominance. I watched as the council struggled to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. The galaxy, as it had been known, was no longer the same. The rules had changed. Humanity was no longer a background player. It was at the center of the storm, and the rest of the galaxy had no choice but to face the consequences. As the human fleet drew closer to its target, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. What was unfolding before me was nothing short of revolutionary. The death of Captain Amanda Stone, tragic as it was, had sparked something that could never be undone. Humanity had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same again.